When we dare to speak in a liberatory voice, we threaten even those who may initially want our words. In the act of overcoming our fear of speech, we join the struggle against domination. We must speak. These are the words of Bell Hooks. And in her book, Teaching to Transgress, she talks about education being the practice of freedom. As a professor and a leader, teaching students to transgress against their racial, social, sexual, and class boundaries is an important goal for me. I've often felt that my voice could support someone else as they try to find their own voice. So to really know who I am, you must know my grandmother, Miss Johnny Mae Lucas, Medea. Medea grew up in a small town in Texas, and she could not attend the local university because of the color of her skin. During segregation, blacks were not allowed to share public spaces, which included schools. So she transferred and she went to Texas Southern University to obtain her master's degree, and she became a first grade teacher. She had a passion for education, and she transferred that passion to me and our family. Well, I can remember going out during the summers and visiting her and playing with my friends as children want to do, and every day she would call me in for a daily lesson, every day. Candice Elaine Lucas, all three names. And you know when someone calls you by all three names, you go. I would walk into the room that was full of books and sit down at the table, and she would share poetry and stories, and her favorite poem was by Langston Hughes, The Negro Mother. Children, I come back today to tell you the story of the long, dark way, how I had to live, how I had to know, in order that my race might live and grow. I am the black woman who crossed the Red Sea, carrying in my body the seed of the free. God put a dream in my soul, and now through my children, I'm reaching my goal. Yes, Langston Hughes. I remember it so vividly. Medea loved poetry, and she loved sharing stories. Well, I started elementary school 1 year early, and I was actually accepted to a private school. My family, they were ecstatic and excited for me, and Medea called me into the table. And she said, Candice, I'm not going to share with you a poem today, but I'm going to tell you a story. Have you heard of Jesse Washington? I sat there listening, not really knowing the name or recognizing the name, and I responded, no, ma'am. She asked again, Jesse Washington, do you know that name? I replied, no, ma'am, Medea, I don't know that name. Then she proceeded to tell me the story of Jesse Washington. In 1916, 10,000 people gathered for the lynching of a 17-year-old boy, Jesse Washington. He worked for a white family, and the wife came up missing one day. They said that Jesse did it because he had blood on his overalls. Well, they took Jesse down to the courthouse, and they drug him through the back door. They took him to the street bearing his name, Washington Avenue. Afterwards, they lynched him. They cut off his fingers and set him on fire. After he died, they cut him down, attached him to a truck, and drug him until his body came apart. Candice, do you know why I told you that story? Waiting for the story to be over, I did not want to think about it anymore, but I could visualize Jesse Washington. I responded, no, ma'am. I don't know why you told me that story, Medea. The first lesson to this story is that I want you to always do the right thing, even when it's unpopular. 10,000 people gathered, and they watched a 17-year-old boy lynched, including the mayor and government officials. They took pictures and they sent it to their family members. They made postcards, but no one stopped to intervene this. The second lesson I want you to know is that sometimes it's going to be difficult for a person of color in America, and that includes a child. So when you go down there to that fancy school, you're not going to hear about these lessons in your history book. That's why I'm telling you these stories, and you're going to share them with your family. Read between the lines to see the missing narrative, Candice. And although Medilla's not with me today, I think about that, reading between the lines to find the missing narratives. The Jesse Washington lynching is a horrible reflection of the racial violence and tension that took place in America. But there were thousands of Jesse Washingtons. Gender inequality has also been a major issue in the fabric of our society. Can you imagine not having the right to vote because of your gender? Can you imagine not being able to obtain a telephone or rent an apartment or even get your own credit card without the assistance of a man? Those were the real experiences of women in this nation. James Baldwin has a quote, "Nothing can be changed until it is faced." So that means that we have to read between the lines to find the missing narratives. When you hear about the education gap and the achievement gap and the educational outcomes for minority students and underrepresented students, you also have to recognize that minority students are expelled and suspended 3 times at a higher rate than their white peers. I am so impressed with the wonderful women that we have serving today at this particular conference and the great accomplishments of women that are taking place today. But even with that being said, a woman makes 78 cents on the dollar compared to a man. An African American woman makes 60 cents, and a Latina woman makes 55 cents. Medea, her grandmother couldn't read and write, but she transferred history through stories and truth-telling and narratives and sharing her voice. And today I stand before you as the first in my family to receive a doctorate, and I'm a professor, and I teach students about the voices and the experiences of the underrepresented. So you may look at me and say, well, Dr. Bledsoe, what can I do? The first thing that you can do is that when you're helping your daughter with her homework and you find in the textbook that it says that slaves were indentured servants, you need to write to the textbook company and also contact the school board. Something else that you can do, you can actually share your own truth and speak your own narrative. And when you meet someone different than yourself, listen to them and share those narratives. Speak your truth and raise your voice. Thank you.